Have you noticed how most men today chase pleasure, yet remain empty inside? It is strange, is it not? Bodies satisfied, but restless souls, lives full of movement and without direction. Nietzsche said that true power does not lie in yielding to desires, but in mastering them, transforming them. And what if I told you that the lust you feel is not the enemy, but the most powerful fuel you possess? The problem is not desire, it is who lets it rule their life, trading mission for seconds of pleasure. Today, you will discover how to confront this force within you, not with fear, but with strategy and awareness. Prepare to dive into a territory where few dare to enter, your own control, your true freedom. And perhaps, in the end, you will realize something that no quick pleasure could ever give you: self-mastery and real power. If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe now to the channel. Have you ever felt that emptiness after pleasure? The body relaxes, but the mind remains restless, as if it had been deceived by itself. Each achievement seems to leave us further from what we truly want to be. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why can bear any how." But when the why disappears, only a repetition of fleeting desires remains. We were taught to believe that freedom is to desire and consume. But is this freedom, or just a prison disguised as choice? Modern man measures himself by achievements, likes, and validation from others. He believes he chooses, but in reality, he is driven by impulse. He does not command. It is desire that pulls the invisible strings of the mind. Nietzsche did not come to comfort, he came to confront. Not so that we love our weaknesses, but so that we overcome them. Among all the forces that imprison man, lust has always been the most dangerous. The same impulse that could generate art and creation becomes waste. It is like an open dam without control. All energy is lost. This video is neither a sermon nor religious moralism. It is a direct call to see beyond immediate pleasure and constant distraction. Ask yourself, who could you become if you did not sabotage yourself for seconds of pleasure? Nietzsche spoke of power, will, and greatness, not just sex. The enemy is not desire, but the man who kneels before it. We live in the era of easy clicks and instant gratification. So many options, so much apparent freedom, and yet we are chained. It is not desire that enslaves, it is submission to it. When you let impulse command, you become a passenger of your own life. And the freedom you seem to have is only an illusion carefully built. Quick pleasure anesthetizes us, but does not fulfill us. Wasted sexual energy corrodes the mind and body silently. Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. The problem was never desire itself. The problem is using desire as a crutch to escape the life that demands courage. Each surrender to impulse is a trade of the eternal for the fleeting. Look around. Exhausted, distracted men seeking validation and cheap pleasure. It is not the woman's body that imprisons, but the use made of her as a substitute for purpose. Lust is the anesthetic of truth, hiding fear and insecurity. Fear of failing, of not being loved, of facing one's own mediocrity. And it is much easier to chase bodies than to face one's own essence. And Nietzsche would ask the cruelest question, are you really alive or just entertained? Pleasure without direction offers only the illusion of freedom. While you bow to impulse, you cease to be the pilot of your own life. True power begins when desire becomes your servant, not your master. And perhaps this is only the first step of a confrontation that will transform you from within. The waste of sexual energy and its transmutation into power and creation. Sexual energy is a brutal force, like magma about to explode. When wasted on immediate pleasures, it becomes only fatigue and frustration. Nietzsche saw this clearly. It is not desire that limits, but the man who does not know how to channel it. Each impulse you let slip is a lost opportunity for creation. It is like having fuel to power a city and spending it on a candle flame. Think of the difference between a musician channeling desire into notes or a man simply seeking distraction. The one who transmutes his impulse generates something that remains, that touches, that impacts. Quick pleasure is like a video game without real score. Momentary fun, nothing built. Nietzsche did not preach repression, but direction. He wanted energy to be used to climb one's own inner mountain. Each modern man who bows to lust repeats empty cycles. Repetition deceives. It seems like movement, but it is walking in circles. What could have been creation, achievement, legacy, is lost in seconds of pleasure. It is not the body or desire's fault. It is the lack of an inner master. Media would call this self-deception, the great distraction of civilization. Imagine a river full of strength, but with its waters diverted through useless paths. All the energy that could move mills, generate light, feed life, is lost in useless turbulence. Such is untransmuted desire, vital force turned into emptiness. It can become art, leadership, intelligence, or discipline, but if not guided, it is only destruction. The man who learns to contain and direct it begins to touch true potency. Transmutation is not magic. It is a daily choice, a confrontation with one's own impulse. Choosing silence instead of distraction, focus instead of pleasure, is discipline in action. Nietzsche saw this as the foundation of greatness. The man who masters desire becomes unpredictable, no longer a slave to stimuli, but a guide of his own life. And this preserved energy transforms the body, mind, and soul into instruments of power. Immediate pleasure seduces, but does not build. The man who bows to impulse is only putting his inner strength to sleep. Transmuting desire into creation is learning to dance with energy, not be dragged by it. It is like transforming wind into sail. The force continues, but now serves purpose. Nietzsche would say, it is the first step to becoming who you truly are. The body may be a refuge of vices, the mind a playground of distractions, but the soul remains waiting for purpose and direction. Each time man chooses to master impulse, he reaffirms sovereignty over himself. Desire ceases to be master and becomes fuel for creation. And when this happens, everything changes. Presence, posture, vision of life. Imagine living with this energy flowing toward greatness, not emptiness. Each impulse of desire becomes a reminder of power you have yet to explore. Nietzsche did not want to limit man. He wanted him to transcend mere consumption. This energy is what separates the common from the rare, the superficial from the profound. And here begins another challenge. Transforming impulse into purpose and lust into creative force. Lust as anesthetic and escape from reality. Lust does not arrive announcing danger. It arrives as consolation, as immediate relief. When boredom, loneliness, or insecurity arise, it presents itself as escape. Nietzsche saw this with brutal clarity. It is not sin, it is a misinterpretation of desire. Quick pleasure anesthetizes the soul, but does not fill the real void. It is like putting a band-aid on a deep wound. It covers, but does not heal. Modern man seeks external distractions to forget himself. A screen, a body, a fantasy. Anything serves to escape introspection. What is lost is the encounter with oneself, the dialogue with inner silence. Nietzsche would warn that each escape strengthens dependence, weakens essence. Lust, when without direction, becomes a crutch for one's own mediocrity. Each impulsive gesture, each instant satisfaction is training for superficiality. Man learns to trade the eternal for the fleeting, the profound for the transitory. He deceives himself. He thinks he lives, but in reality, he repeats patterns, cycles, and illusions. Nietzsche would call this self-deception, entertainment replacing fulfillment. And it is in this void that lust takes root, like a weed in the garden of the soul. It disguises the smell of the wound, but does not heal the rot within. The problem is not the body desired, but the life one avoids facing. Man uses pleasure as anesthesia to not confront his own mediocrity. Each unguided impulse is wasted energy, lost opportunities. Nietzsche would call it the great irony. We seek freedom, but chain ourselves to impulse. Lust hides fear. Fear of confronting flaws, loneliness, rejection, and weakness. It is easier to chase easy pleasures than to face the mirror of the soul. That is why men and women get lost in empty relationships and repetitive routines. Immediate pleasure becomes a substitute for purpose, a crutch for courage that never arrives. Nietzsche would remind us, facing fear is more powerful than any external stimulus. The truth few want to hear. Each indulgence without direction trains you for failure. You repeat patterns, but do not grow. You walk, but do not advance. Lust is anesthesia, but the real pain it hides is a call for transformation. When you understand this, each impulse becomes a warning signal, not a reward. Nietzsche saw in this confrontation the opportunity to become master of oneself. The emptiness we feel after quick pleasure is an invitation to look inward. The mind and body seek meaning, not distraction. Lust without purpose is escape, not vital force. But when redirected, it becomes a tool for creation, power, and greatness. And it is precisely at this point the man chooses between being servant or sovereign of himself. Imagine transforming each impulse into a reminder of your mission, not an escape. Each desire could remind, here is your energy, do something greater. Nietzsche did not want to censor, but to transform, elevate, and direct. Lust thus ceases to be the enemy and becomes the fuel for evolution itself. And then another challenge arises, learning to transmute energy into work, legacy, and inner strength. Transmutation of sexual energy into creation and power. Nietzsche did not see sexual energy as the enemy. He saw it as a primordial force. The problem is the one who bows to it, surrendering without direction. When directed, this energy becomes the engine of creation, power, and transformation. It is like taking a low fire and turning it into a flame that illuminates, warms, and builds. The difference lies in using or being used, in guiding or being guided by impulse. Imagine if each desire were a warning signal, reminding you of your purpose. Each impulse could become fuel for art, business, body, and mind. Nietzsche would teach, sexual energy, preserved and transmuted, creates greatness. The man who masters his impulses is not a captive, but the architect of his own destiny. And the feeling of power that arises does not come from pleasure, but from self-discipline. Transmutation is not repression. It is awareness and redirection. When you face desire and say, I am greater than you, alchemy happens. The body ceases to be a slave, the mind strengthens, and the spirit rises. Nietzsche saw in this the opportunity to create something lasting, not fleeting. It is energy converted into presence, impact, legacy, and fulfillment. Think of the mind as an engine and sexual energy as fuel. Without direction, it burns fast, wastes itself, and leaves only smoke. With discipline, each drop becomes force to climb, build, and conquer. It is the difference between a man who lives in repetition and one who creates universes. Nietzsche knew that true freedom requires this inner mastery. The body becomes a temple and the mind a sword, all aligned with intention. Desire is no longer master, but servant of the greater mission you have chosen. Each impulse contains potential, if not wasted on empty distractions. Nietzsche believed that pain and pleasure, when understood, become allies. Transmutation transforms chaos into order, impulse into action, desire into work. Modern men confuse pleasure with power and energy with escape. The essential difference: power requires direction, Pleasure only requires momentary surrender. When you learn to channel energy, you feel the world revering your presence. Not for what you display, but for what you contain, for what you build silently. Nietzsche would call this creating yourself, becoming the masterpiece of your own existence. This transmutation is a daily exercise, not instant magic. It is choosing silence when the world shouts, focus when everything distracts. It is saying no to easy impulse to say yes to evolution. And each small victory over desire strengthens body, mind, and soul. Nietzsche saw in this the construction of the rare, magnetic, and sovereign man. When mastered, sexual energy becomes force to lead, create, and inspire. The man who has transmuted it no longer chases ephemeral pleasures. His life becomes presence, his work becomes legacy, his silence becomes power. Nietzsche taught, becoming who you are requires transforming impulse into creation. And it is at this point that true freedom and greatness begin to emerge. Disguised slavery of freedom. Modern man believes he is free, but his freedom is illusory. He chooses desires already shaped, impulses that culture has manufactured for him. The promise is pleasure. The reality is a prison disguised as choice. Nietzsche would call this a race in circles, walking but going nowhere. The problem is not pleasure. It is the lack of direction, the void behind constant consumption. We are surrounded by stimuli, screens, notifications, fast and easy promises. Each click, each touch, distances us from ourselves and brings us closer to repetition. The illusion of freedom keeps us distracted, but weakens the soul. Nietzsche saw in this the silent tragedy, vital energy wasted on ephemerality. Man becomes a slave of desires without realizing the chain is invisible. Pleasure without direction not only tires, but corrodes mind and body. It is like water that escaped from the dam, wasted force, energy without purpose. Each momentary indulgence anesthetizes, but does not transform, does not strengthen, does not elevate. The emptiness grows, even with the temporary sensation of satisfaction. Nietzsche would remind us, those who chase quick pleasure forget to build lasting meaning. Modern culture teaches us to seek pleasure, but it does not teach what to do with energy. Thus, men spend vital force on distractions, illusions, and the validation of others. Each uncontrolled desire is like fire without guidance, capable of burning and destroying. Nietzsche believed that only internal discipline could transform this fire into power. The true challenge is to recognize that freedom without purpose is just an illusion. Imagine the effect of every sexual impulse or thoughtless desire left unchanneled. It drains motivation, energy, and creative strength, leaving only fatigue and frustration. Momentary pleasure replaces deep action and true accomplishment. Nietzsche would call this the exchange of the eternal for the fleeting, the essential for the trivial. Men learn too late that they are building emptiness while seeking satisfaction. Real freedom requires self-mastery, the ability to choose what truly matters. It is looking at the impulse and deciding, you serve me, not I you. Nietzsche saw in this internal mastery the beginning of greatness, presence, and power. Without it, we continue reacting, carried away by desires and distractions. Pleasure without purpose keeps us captive, even when we believe we are free. The cycle is silent, quick pleasure, sense of relief, growing emptiness, repetition. Men read, consume, follow mentors, yet remain disconnected from themselves. Nietzsche would remind us that knowledge without transformation is not enough. True freedom arises when energy and desire find conscious direction. And it is at this point that a man stops being a passenger and becomes the pilot of his own life. Every small choice, every no to an easy impulse, strengthens inner sovereignty. Pleasure without direction imprisons us, but discipline frees and transforms. Nietzsche believed that only the man who masters his impulses achieves real presence. It is the contrast between the illusion of freedom and true freedom that defines destiny. And it is in this awakening that a man realizes the prison was inside him all along, transforming desire into purpose and beginning to redirect energy. The secret is not to eliminate desire, but to transform it into creative force. Every impulse can become fuel for accomplishment and growth. Nietzsche saw desire as vital energy, capable of moving mountains if properly directed. It is like fire. It destroys when uncontrolled, warms and illuminates when contained. The essential question is, do you command your energy, or do you let it dictate your choices? Transforming desire into purpose requires discipline, focus, and awareness of the present moment. Every time you choose not to give in to a hollow impulse, you are building inner power. It is simple, but it requires courage to look inward and recognize what you truly want. Nietzsche would call this taking full responsibility for your own life. It is not about repression. It is about conscious choice aligned with what truly matters. Think of the energy wasted on distractions that seem urgent but are not essential. Empty conversations, pornography, social media, validation from others, all these things drain you. Nietzsche would say that the man who masters the impulse becomes unpredictable and magnetic. By redirecting desire, the same force that once consumed you begins to generate creation. Art, business, study, training, writing, or any project gains intensity and life. Redirection begins with small decisions, which accumulate and shape character. Choosing silence when the body demands noise, choosing focus when the mind disperses. Nietzsche believed that self-control was the foundation of true freedom. Every conscious no is a step towards something greater, something that endures. Momentary pleasure is replaced by lasting meaning, and life transforms. It is in the daily battle against superficial impulses that self-mastery emerges. A man learns that quick pleasure is anesthesia and that vital energy has infinite value. Nietzsche would say that he who bows to impulse never truly knows himself. On the contrary, he who masters desire finds a silent and irresistible power. And it is in this process that the presence of one who is not guided, but guides his own life, is born. Redirecting desire also means facing discomfort, silence, and solitude. It is not pleasant at first, but it is essential to recognize what truly matters. Nietzsche saw in pain and challenged the gateway to the sacred, the opportunity for evolution. Every moment of resistance strengthens character and elevates energy to a new level. Pleasure ceases to be master and becomes a tool for creation and growth. Imagine if every impulse were a reminder to act, to create, to evolve. Desire becomes an ally guiding you toward impactful projects. Nietzsche would call this eternalizing your energy, transforming the moment into legacy. Body, mind, and spirit begin to work in synchrony toward clear objectives. A man becomes the architect of his own life, not a puppet of fleeting desires. Real power arises when you realize that the energy that once destroyed you now builds. Lust ceases to be escape and becomes the driving force for lasting achievements. Nietzsche reminds us that life is opportunity and responsibility, not indulgence. Every conscious choice is a step toward becoming rare, magnetic, and complete. And it is on this path that a man catches the first glimpse of true freedom. Lust is anesthetic and the root of fear. Facing the truth, lust is not just desire, it is a curtain that hides fear. Fear of confronting one's own mediocrity, fear of failure, fear of feeling emptiness. Nietzsche saw the modern man seeking refuge in pleasure to avoid looking inward. Every quickly consumed impulse becomes anesthesia, fleeing from reality. And thus, vital energy is drained, leaving no space for growth or awareness. Momentary pleasure gives the illusion of importance, but builds nothing. Nothing endures. It is easy to get lost in screens, bodies, images, and conversations that distract from essence. Nietzsche believed that facing discomfort was the only path to evolution. Every act of escape is a lost opportunity for self-mastery and personal discovery. The man who masters lust transforms fear into fuel, anxiety into direction. When lust arises, it is a symptom of boredom, loneliness, or lack of real purpose. It is the silence of the soul demanding attention, but many ignore it with instant gratification. Nietzsche would call this confusion between sensation and meaning, appearance and essence. The impulse to seek quick pleasure signals that something deep has not been confronted. Recognizing this is the first step to stop being a slave to your own desire. Every act of giving into impulse is an exchange. The eternal for the fleeting, the profound for the superficial. It is like trading a masterpiece for a shadow that passes quickly and disappears. Nietzsche saw the waste of energy as silent self-sabotage. Modern man repeats habits and cycles that seem like movement but lead nowhere. The real challenge is learning to see beyond immediate stimulus and its false rewards. The fear hidden behind lust is also fear of solitude and silence. Facing one's own reflection in the mirror is harder than any ephemeral pleasure. Nietzsche would call it confrontation with the abyss of the soul, essential for self-knowledge. By resisting, a man discovers strengths he did not know existed within himself. And every conscious resistance is a seed planted for freedom and inner power. Lust becomes an anesthetic, but also an opportunity for transformation. It shows where we are empty and which wounds we refuse to face. Nietzsche believed that only by confronting one's own pain does a man elevate. Every controlled impulse is energy preserved for something grander. Pleasure ceases to be master and becomes messenger, signaling the right direction. Think of every desire as a warning. Here is something that needs to be confronted. It is the chance to transform frustration into action, impulse into creation. Nietzsche saw in the awareness of this cycle the difference between mere survival and becoming rare. The man who understands the function of lust masters his fears and transforms his life. He is not guided by impulse, but leads his energy, shaping destiny and character. Deep down, facing lust is facing oneself and the fears that accompany it. It is not about denying pleasure, but not allowing it to define who you are. Nietzsche would call this exercise of internal sovereignty, becoming master of your own life. Every moment of resistance builds silent power, presence, and natural magnetism. And it is in this harsh and brutal confrontation that a man begins to discover his true freedom. Transmutation of desire into power, self-mastery and creation. Nietzsche did not say to kill desire, but to elevate it, transforming it into creative force. Every contained impulse is energy that can sculpt body, mind, and spirit. It is like a dammed river. If directed, it creates cities. If released, it is lost on the ground. The man who understands this learns that pleasure without direction is absolute waste. Discipline becomes the bridge between instinct and greatness, between impulse and work. To transmute is not to repress. It is to recognize energy and say, I control, I guide. Nietzsche saw desire as a servant, not a master. When transformed, it purifies, strengthens, and clears the mind of silent despair. Body and mind become instruments of power, ready for creation and leadership. The man who practices this does not seek pleasure. He seeks deep and lasting fulfillment. Imagine every sexual impulse, every lust, as a spark waiting for the right fire. This fire can ignite a project, a book, an artwork, or even a cultural change. Nietzsche believed that true strength comes from preserved and intentional energy. Every mastered desire is fuel that transforms routine into transformation, repetition into achievement. The man who does this becomes rare, unpredictable, and magnetic, naturally respected. The silent presence of the man who masters his body and mind is almost ancestral. The gaze is firm, the voice calm, gestures full of intention, without rush or lack. Nietzsche saw in this control the mark of the free spirit, one who guides himself. It is the man who walks among distractions and deficiencies with internal abundance. While others spend energy on ephemeral pleasures, he creates and builds legacy. This transmutation is not easy. It requires organic discipline, difficult choices, and daily confrontation. Choosing silence when the mind demands noise, training when the body wants to yield. Nietzsche would call this honor, the man telling himself he is worthy of what he builds. Every act of resistance strengthens freedom, presence, and emotional autonomy. Pleasure does not disappear, but becomes fuel, not master, not escape. Self-mastery is the turning point. Desire ceases to be master and becomes an instrument. Channeling sexual energy generates power, focus, and natural magnetism without external effort. Nietzsche believed that life repeated infinitely would be bearable only for those who know themselves. The man who masters desire creates a silent, invisible advantage, yet felt by all. It is a type of power that is not flaunted, but subtly transforms everything around. Every conscious choice is a step toward absolute freedom, living without needing to flee from oneself. Lust, when understood, ceases to be an obstacle and becomes a tool for evolution. Nietzsche saw in the control of instinct the key to creating, leading, and impacting culture. The sovereign man does not depend on validation, pleasure, or distractions. He is his own measure. His energy is not consumed, it is multiplied, making him increasingly rare and desirable. In the end, what Nietzsche proposes is simple and brutal. Transform impulse into creation, lust into power. It is not denial, it is elevation. It is not escape, it is confrontation and direction. The man who masters desire becomes magnetic, respected, capable of accomplishing what few can. Every moment of resistance and discipline builds presence, legacy, and real freedom. And thus, what was once distraction and energy loss becomes creative force and path to greatness. And now I ask you, what did you think of this dive into yourself? Which part made you awaken to the truth about desire, lust, and power? And tell me, which character do you want me to analyze in the next channel video? If you want to continue exploring the human mind, evolving and discovering paths to freedom, subscribe. Activate notifications to not miss the upcoming videos that will challenge everything you think you know. Remember, pleasure without direction is illusion, but discipline and self-mastery give you real power. With every conscious choice, you approach your best version, the one who does not let impulses dominate. So breathe, reflect, and choose. Does the energy inside you serve you, or do you serve it? These two videos in front of you are not here by chance. And what if everything you believe about yourself is just a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos beside this one and begin to break this mirror. You will have to risk the click. So, which one will you choose?